Mrs. Munro, this is Julie Albin, LHS class of 1976. I am privileged and delighted to share in this tribute to you and all that you did for us. Little did you or I know that your fingertips would grace the medical records of thousands of patients' charts. You helped give me the tools to give those patients the integrity and dignity with words that they deserve. And I say thank you for that. Also, to let you know, my youngest son, Preston, is a Latin teacher, a high school Latin teacher, and he carries the energy and excitement for teaching that you did, and he carries home with him I call it a school box, a crate of things, and I'm sure you carried something much the same with you home every day. I am so proud to say that the torch still burns. Thank you so much, Mrs. Munro. We were blessed to have you.
Is there any better reward for a teacher than to know you've inspired your pupils? If not, Dixie Munro's spirit is basking in well-deserved glory from the many students she inspired. My name is Karen Schrader Godin. Dixie Munro inspired me to become a teacher and writer, and has been my role model for more than 50 years. As a member of Lamar High School class of 64, I was blessed to have Mrs. Munro for 2 years of English and 1 year of journalism. In that time, she instilled in me an appreciation for the power of the English language, a passion for literature, and a love of journalism. Through her expectation for a 200-word essay every week, Mrs. Munro developed and refined our writing skills while enforcing self-discipline and time management. By encouraging us to explore a variety of literary genres, Mrs. Munro expanded our worlds beyond our imaginations. By introducing me to journalism, Mrs. Munro revealed my life's path and eventual vocation. While I can regret our loss of Dixie Munro, I cannot mourn her. Whenever 2 or more of her former students reminisce about their high school years, her name comes up. She will be remembered and honored as long as we, her students, survive.
I'm Lori McMillan Pratt, class of 70. I knew Dixie, Mrs. Munro, all my life because she was my mother's best friend. Polly and I have found clever letters dating from before the 30s between these two. Dixie shared with me descriptive stories about my 2 great-grandmothers. She had known them quite well as a girl. She spent a lot of time in their homes. Mary and I are both named for the same mutual friend who died young. My first name is Mary. When Mary and I were in grade school and I lived in Aurora, she and Dixie would make a bus trip up to the dentist. Our moms would laugh and talk, and Mary and I invented a murder mystery featuring their reclusive neighbor. In 1980, Mom and Dixie made the trip of a lifetime to England, where Polly joined them. They saw all the pertinent sites: Canterbury, Dover, Bath, Stonehenge, Shakespeare, and others. I will miss her, her wit, her knowledge, especially of my heritage, and especially her love for my mom and my family.
From English words to Spanish palabras, I always had a lot of them. I also had wonderful teachers like you, Mrs. Munro. In Lamar High School, I was given the kindest teaching, and learning was fun. I'm grateful to all of that teaching, and I took it many directions. After school, I first began as an editor for the newspaper in Pueblo, Colorado. I then went on to run my own online informational directory. In 2003, I started my publishing company, where I published 5 books, 3 of my own and 2 for others. Working with words never ended, and I am now studying to become an allergy antidote practitioner. I will do so in April 2017, and it all began with you in Lamar High School. Mrs. Munro, there really and truly aren't enough words or palabras to say thank you and gracias. and I do appreciate all that you've done. I know if you were still around, you'd still be teaching and still be inspiring us all. Thank you again. From Rhonda Spellman.
Hi, I'm Scott Northrup, class of '69. I've been a chemistry professor for the past 36 years, and I can unequivocally say that Mrs. Munro's English class and the ability to think critically, to write effectively, that she instilled in us has been central to a successful career. I've expressed this to her many times in cards and letters. In publishing dozens of scientific articles, my ability to write well has made all the difference. Several times I've had grant proposal reviewers say in their review, "Finally, a grant proposal that is actually a joy to read." I also wrote a column for my local newspaper for many years. Mrs. Munro, you're my favorite teacher of all time, my most impactful one for sure, and a wonderful personal friend to my family, and we are eternally grateful.
I'm Ed Havens, and I'm part of the 1969 LHS graduating class. We're the first class to graduate from the brand new high school. Well, it goes without saying that Mrs. Munro was my favorite teacher of all time, and I've had many great teachers all through school. I've always enjoyed telling stories, but concentrating on proper grammar and punctuation to write them, well, that only cramped my style. So I'm sure I was a real challenge to her. Fortunately, she graded equally on content and grammar, so I was able to get passing grades in her class. Mrs. Munro was very passionate about proper English. I remember the time when someone thought it would be fun to spray paint graffiti and obscenities all around the school. Well, that's the only time I saw Dixie angry. She ranted, in very proper English of course, about what they had done to our school. Well, I don't remember everything she said, but one statement sticks in my mind to this day. Without uttering the actual swear word the graffiti artist used, she described it as being an Anglo-Saxon term for a bodily function. Well, from that description, we all knew what the word was. As recently as 2009, Dixie Munro was grading my work. As always, she was brutally honest about how sloppy my writing was, but offered words of encouragement as to how it was bound to get much, much better. That brought back many warm memories of how she routinely left encouraging comments on the bottom of my assignments. I love Dixie Munro, and I can say without hesitation that I am a better person today because of how she taught me. As a matter of fact, I'd venture to say that our world is a better place today because of the many students who learned about life from her. Dixie Munro, I love you and I will miss you.
Dear Mary, Polly, and Sandy, and to the thousands of students whose lives were so richly expanded by Dixie Munro, you know, there is so much in my own heart to share about this wonderful woman, so much that I feel she gave to me personally. But first, I must say thank you for sharing your mother. God bless you and keep you and comfort you with his eternal tender mercies. I want you to know that each time I think of Mrs. Munro, and for 5 decades I've thought of her many, many times, I always smile. Her influence on me, starting in 1967, was positive and always laced with her wonderful humor. Always. It was your mother who steered me mostly gently, but occasionally with a firmer hand, toward my life as a writer. It was your mother who strengthened my own love for the English language. Moreover, it was your mother who made me an absolute OCD stickler for using the best word in the best context in the most bestest of all possible sentences. Seriously. My graduation from Lamar High School in 1968 was followed by a rather brief but meaningful stint at the University of Denver, where I realized it was Dixie Munro and not my DU Lit professors who was the gold standard of English teachers. It was Dixie Munro, a force of nature in the classroom, who brought Beowulf to life in Old English. And college professors didn't hold a candle to her step-by-step instructions for steaming a pudding inside a sheep's stomach, which, she explained in her inimitable voice, had previously been separated from the sheep. It was Dixie Munro who put the fear of God in me, and I'm sure others, that I'd never retain all that poured forth from her vast storehouse of grammar. There's not a word's origin, nor definition, nor part of speech, nor grammatical rule that she did not know and did not valiantly try to impart to the masses. Honestly. But, and this is a case that calls for starting a sentence with a strong conjunction but, and also demands following it with a parenthetic clause that begins with the conjunction and. The fear of forgetting was always mixed with enormous respect for her as a teacher, unabashed admiration for her as a person, and outright love for her as a guide. That she was a woman who taught thousands of students how to string together words and fashion thoughts on paper, though, isn't the heart of this matter. The heart and the soul of this matter is what kind of woman would dedicate her life to such a task. And I believe it wasn't how much she loved the English language, but rather how much she loved each one of us. In my heart, I believe she fought for each and every student, fought to reach and teach and send on with something that would last. Dixie Munro is the person many of us would say herded us to personal and academic betterment because of who she was and what she did. Dixie Munro is in large part responsible for who we are and what we do today. And she did it all with a masterful stroke of a red pen, with a cocked eyebrow, and with that silent look, and with her quick and her hearty laugh. This is not the first time I've publicly thanked God for putting Dixie Munro's path in intersection with mine, but it seems altogether right that I thank him, and I thank you, Mary, Polly, and Sandy. I know our God uses us in wondrous and wonderful ways, and I am so very, very grateful He used Dixie Munro to bless us all.
Hello, this is Bob Smith from the Lamar Savage class of 1969. I'm going to say a few words here about Mrs. Munro. I've got a couple of notes so I don't forget much. I probably will anyway. But anyway, we meet many, many people throughout our lives, and there's some that mean or have more of an effect on us than others. Mrs. Munro had a big impact on me, and it was a good one. At times I probably didn't think so. But she was extremely adamant about her class, and even though she was, I wouldn't say it was strict, but adamant, she did instill a respect for her and a love for her. And I think we've seen that throughout the years as we've honored her. One of my big problems when I was in her class was commas. And anyway, she instilled in me, how to use commas, or I hope she did. And but more importantly, she instilled in me why we use them. And it is important. To this day, I still try to use commas correctly. I probably fail her more than I should. I hesitate to think that I did her proud, but she certainly did me good. And she's a wonderful lady that we're all going to miss, but she's left a legacy of hundreds of young men and women who have gone on to do amazing things in this world. And so, Mrs. Munro, thank you again for all you've done for me and everyone else. And that's about it. Love to all from Bob in Colorado. Bye now.
Good afternoon. My name is Jennifer Inman Day. No, wait, that's not my name. I would like to share with you the comments that Jennifer Inman Day, class of 71 at Lamar High School, sent to us today regarding Mrs. Munro. English is the Western Germanic branch of the Indo-European family of languages. So imparted master teacher Mrs. Dixie Munro. To say that Mrs. Munro was a master teacher would be a vast understatement. She was a teaching savant. Mrs. Munro took her students far beyond the confines of a small town on the high plains of Colorado to a variety of rich and wonderful settings that only literature well presented could provide. Her presentation style, rooted in an amazing knowledge of history, was exciting and infectious. She reinforced my love for history and was my inspiration to become a teacher. Her other gift to me and the thousands of other students who blossomed under her tutelage was the ability to write. Suffice it to say that without her instruction, I would not be the person I am today. Mrs. Munro was one in a million, and I am forever grateful that I had the good fortune to be one of her students.
We sleeked cowering timorous beastie. Oh, the tumults in thy breastie. Hi, my name is Dan O'Connell, Lamar High School, class of 1967. This is for Mrs. Munro. I picked this poem by Robert Burns for two reasons. Number one, he wrote this in the mid-1700s, and he was a Scottish poet, and he wrote in the Scottish dialect of the Old English language. In my entire life, I've met one person that knew anything about the Old English language, and that was Mrs. Munro. Secondly, it's about the opening lines of the senior play that we had that year, 1967. It was called The Mouse That Roared, and it was directed by Mrs. Munro, sponsored by Mrs. Munro. And I believe she was the director of everybody's senior class play as long as she was probably at Lamar High School. Have a lot of teachers in 12 years, public education, 3 of them at Lamar High School, and I can say without a doubt that Mrs. Munro was the most outstanding, the best teacher I had in my entire public education, and I would include college in that too. A couple of things stayed with me for 50 years that I'm sure stayed with a lot of you folks. Today's modern communications, Facebook, text messaging, and let's not even talk about Twitter, but you see all the time posts on Facebook, comments, articles, whatever it may be, that the author does not even think about using correct language, sentence structure, punctuation, grammar, what have you. Text messaging is get it done in as short as few letters as you can, but I still take the time to write full words and correct sentences and use punctuation even in text messaging. I'm sure that applies to a lot of people that are watching this video right now. I also consider myself kind of a grammar policeman when it comes to reading other people's posts and articles, and it's very hard to bite my tongue and not write something a lot of the times. As I said, a couple of things that stayed with me. This is our playbook of 1967, The Mouse That Roared. She was the sponsor of it. And this is a copy of the Savage Chieftain newspaper, which I was in the journalism class with Mrs. Munro along with the English class. And she was the sponsor of the school newspaper. And she was the director of the senior play, and she just had a busy year. She's a busy year every year with her students, mostly the seniors, I believe. I think a lot of you people are probably still wake up nights diagramming sentences in your head and thinking about the Canterbury Tales. The last thing I'd like to say is she is one of the few teachers at Lamar High School that I asked to sign my yearbook, my annual, and she wrote a nice message to me in that annual. And I look at that every now and again and think about her and the fun we had doing the senior play. So in closing, I'd like to once again thank Mrs. Munro for all her influence on thousands of students who have walked through the halls of Lamar High School and sat in her classroom in her many classes and were wonderfully taught, not just English and journalism and drama and what have you, but also a lot of life experiences passed along and instilled in us. I also like to thank Mike Welk and Eddie Havens for putting this together, and I appreciate all the work that they have done. Once again, thank you, Mrs. Munro, and we miss you.
Tribute to Dixie Munro from Andrew Gulliford. What's there to say about Dixie Munro? She taught us to write. She taught us to value American literature. She put up with our classroom antics with poise and grace and forgiveness. Like all good teachers, she listened to us. She took us from where we began with our skills, and she shaped us, improved us, made us better writers and readers. It's hard to teach high school because high school students think they know so much and are easily distracted. We were blessed in those days without cell phones, Facebook, and the myriad of distractions that are keeping young students from learning the great stories and books of our nation's literary heritage. Everything is too fast now, but in Dixie's day, we discussed books. She shared ideas. She helped us understand our potential and that we could leave Lamar and Prowers County and enter a wider world, knowing that there would always be great books and ideas that would sustain us. I remember a poster in her room and the words of William Faulkner. When he won the Nobel Prize for Literature, he stated, "Man will not only endure, he will prevail." Over the decades, I've thought a lot about that quote. Like so many other things she did, she inspired us. Her career epitomized what good teaching is all about, and what better legacy to leave than the hundreds of students whose lives she touched and changed. This is what Faulkner said, and this is what Mrs. Munro believed. "I believe that man will not merely endure, he will prevail. He is immortal, not because he alone among creatures has an inexhaustible voice, but because he has a soul, a spirit capable of compassion and sacrifice and endurance. The poet's, the writer's duty is to write about these things. It is his privilege to help a man endure by lifting his heart, by reminding him of the courage and honor and hope and pride and compassion and pity and sacrifice which have been the glory of his past. The poet's voice need not merely be the record of man, it can be one of the props, the pillars to help him endure and prevail. In such a materialistic world, it is so important to honor her sacrifices for us. Dixie worked for others, not for herself. I am a college professor and author of 5 books, in part because of her teaching and guidance. I owe her. We all owe her a debt of gratitude. Andrew Gulliford. I've been trying to figure out ever since I found out there was going to be this memorial service who Dixie Munro was for me. Dixie was a woman who drove me to madness and often enraged me by holding me to standards, her standards. Dixie was a woman who pressed me to be more than simply the smart rat I had always been, who did just enough to get my A in her class. She gave rewrite new meaning in my life. She changed my life and my expectations of what was possible for me. She made me a better person, a better mentor and coach, and a better mother. Because at the corner of her desk, I learned how to hold people to standards of excellence with gentle firmness. She ably modeled that ruthless compassion for all of us. Others will speak eloquently about how she taught us all to write. But what does that really mean? She taught us more than the nuts and bolts of writing. She taught us the mechanics of writing. She taught us not to split our infinitives or dangle our participles. She taught us how to spell and how to punctuate, diagram sentences, and conjugate verbs. She taught us how not to bore our readers, how to reach for new ways of saying things, thus expanding our vocabulary. For me, I think what it meant most was she taught us how to think clearly, formulate our thoughts into ideas or concepts, and then to articulate those thoughts on paper in a way that communicated or told a story in a compelling way. One of my colleagues and writing collaborators once described my writing as mastery at spinning bullshit into gold. Yep, I am going to claim that. Dixie was the author of that capacity in me, and I will forever treasure the gift she gave me. Because gifts from God don't come with ribbons and bows. They occasionally show up like a lead pipe upside the head. I want to speak to something else Dixie taught me. She taught that understanding literature requires understanding the context within which it was written. So she taught us English history while she taught us English literature. Literature comes alive in a way unimaginable when you grasp the historical context of that writing, when you get an inkling about the message the writer or the poet was trying to convey to their contemporaries at that time in that place. Context is the key to influence and the key to understanding. I use that model for thinking and influencing change in my work to this very day. I can say without hesitation or reservation, there was never another teacher in my life who had the impact on the totality of my life and my skills that Dixie Munro had. I will forever be grateful. Thank you, great lady. Thank you forever. With deep respect, Elvita.
My name is Neil Welk, class of 1977, Lamar High School. Mrs. Munro challenged me. She was one of the first teachers I ever had who refused to let me get by with work that was just good enough, even if it meant a good grade. Mrs. Munro challenged me to be at my very best, and she pushed me, she prodded me, she coaxed, and sometimes she threatened me, but she always got the best out of me that she could. For that, I will always be grateful. I chose a career as a sports writer, something that she expressed some dismay at over the years, as she said that she wished that I had found something more substantial to dedicate my life as a writer toward, but it's something that I always had a great passion. It's also something that over the last few days made me recognize a great irony as I look back on what Mrs. Munro meant to my life and my career. I realized that she was one of the greatest coaches I've ever been around. I covered men like Bill McCartney, Dan Reeves, Mike Shanahan, Doug Moe over the years, and all of those men had the same thing in common. They got the best out of their players. They didn't settle for just good. That's exactly what Mrs. Munro did. And for that, I'm very grateful, because I'm now one of the hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands, of people that came through her class and carried the lessons that she taught us through all those years. Thanks, Mrs. Munro. You were a great coach. I appreciate it very much.
I am David Northrup, Lamar High School class of 1966. As I reflect back on the people who had the greatest influence on my life, certainly one person that stands out is Mrs. Dixie Munro. I have never been a very verbal person and have basically lived by the adage, never miss a good opportunity to be quiet. Consequently, I strongly disliked writing those weekly themes in Miss Munro's senior English class. But I have come to recognize that we live by ideals and principles expressed in words. Mrs. Munro's efforts to teach us English and how to express ourselves in words have been a recurring blessing in my life. As I pursued my pathway in my professional life, from farmer and livestock feeder to exploration geophysicist to college science faculty, I feel that I was carried to a significant extent on her shoulders. It has been my experience that teachers and others who have high expectations of us engender the greatest growth and accomplishment. I will be ever grateful for this English teacher who had high expectations of me, even Mrs. Dixie Munro.
I wanted to say how lucky that I feel that I had Dixie Munro as an instructor in school. She was such a proper lady, but yet she had a wonderful sense of humor. And the weekend that she took us all to Greeley, to Humanities Weekend, to hear and see and get to be a part of the Canterbury Tales. And it was just so much fun to get to listen to all of that. But she definitely could do that herself. Then when we came back and she challenged us to write a story about one of the characters, and she just let us fly with our imagination and totally encouraged us, and I have always been thankful for that.